My $1,000,000 misadventures. When life gives you lottery tickets. I was 34 years old and walking my neighbor's emotional support ferret when I found out I won $242 million in the Powerball lottery. Let me back up, because I know that sentence raises more questions than it answers. My name is Jack Reynolds, and 6 months ago, I was what sociologists and my disappointed parents call a gig economy casualty. Translation: I was driving for 3 different rideshare apps, delivering food for 2 meal services, walking pets for an app called Woof. Yes, the exclamation point is mandatory, and occasionally renting out my apartment to tourists, while sleeping in my 2014 Prius. I had a degree in comparative literature that was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine, $67,342 in student loan debt, and a dating profile that had been collecting digital dust since my last relationship imploded when I couldn't afford a weekend getaway to Tahoe. In other words, I was the poster child for millennial economic anxiety. My retirement plan was literally, hope society collapses before I need a hip replacement. My neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, was an eccentric 72-year-old widow who owned Fernando, the aforementioned emotional support ferret. She paid me $30 a day to walk Fernando, which mostly involved me carrying him in a special backpack with a mesh window while he judged pedestrians with his beady little eyes. "Jack, dear," Mrs. Abernathy had said that fateful Tuesday, "would you mind picking up my lottery tickets when you take Fernando out? I've chosen the numbers already. They're based on my late husband's dental work dates." I'd nodded, taking the slip of paper with her numbers and the $20 bill she pressed into my hand. "And get one for yourself," she added with a wink. Stanley always said Tuesdays were lucky. I dutifully purchased her tickets, and on a whim, bought one for myself with the same numbers. It seemed harmless, and honestly, playing the same numbers doubled our cosmic chances, right? That's not how probability works. But whatever, I had dropped statistics twice in college. So there I was, 3 days later, standing outside a PetSmart with Fernando's judgmental face, peering from his backpack, checking the lottery results on my phone out of sheer boredom. And then my knees buckled. The numbers matched. All of them. I immediately called Mrs. Abernathy. "Did you check your ticket?" I wheezed. "Oh, Jack, I lost it somewhere in the house," she said cheerfully. "I was using it as a bookmark for my romance novel. Did we win something small?" "Mrs. A, we won the jackpot. $242 million. The line went silent for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, I heard what sounded like glass breaking. "Mrs. Abernathy, are you okay?" "I just dropped my martini," she said faintly. "Come back right now and we'll sort this out." An hour later, after verifying the numbers a dozen times and calming Mrs. Abernathy down with another martini, we faced a dilemma. She'd lost her ticket, but I had mine, with her numbers. Technically, it was my win. Legally, it was my win. But morally, "It's your ticket, dear," Mrs. Abernathy said, trying to sound noble despite the obvious disappointment in her voice. Fernando, sensing the tension, had retreated into a decorative throw pillow. I looked at this woman who had been kinder to me than most people in my life, who shared her homemade pierogi every Sunday, who never judged me for being a 30-something underachiever. "We're splitting it," I announced. 50-50. Your numbers, my purchase. Partnership. The fierce hug she gave me nearly cracked a rib. Fernando, disturbed by the commotion, emerged from the pillow to express his disapproval. "We're rich, Fernando," I told him. He looked supremely unimpressed. Little did I know that Fernando's unimpressed glare would become the most rational response to everything that followed. The Lottery Commission advised us to keep quiet about our win until we'd secured legal representation and decided how to claim the prize. Mrs. Abernathy and I nodded solemnly at this advice, and then immediately violated it by celebrating with a champagne toast on her balcony where at least 4 neighbors saw us. By morning, our entire apartment building knew something was up. Jackpot option or annuity? Asked my best friend Derek when I finally confessed to him 2 days later. Derek was a financial advisor who wore vineyard vines unironically and had been trying to get me to open an IRA since college. Now he was sitting in my kitchen, looking like he might spontaneously orgasm over the financial planning possibilities. Jackpot, I said. Mrs. A is 72. Annuity doesn't make sense for her. Smart, he nodded. After taxes, you're looking at about $73 million each. You need a team immediately. Estate attorney, tax specialist, wealth manager. I need to process this first, I said, still feeling strangely detached from reality. I haven't even quit my jobs yet. Derek looked personally offended. Quit them now. Text them. I'll wait. I picked up my phone, opened my rideshare app, and stared at it. I'd been fantasizing about quitting for years, usually after passengers vomited in my car or complained about taking a longer route when they'd entered the wrong destination. But now that I could actually do it, I felt weirdly hesitant. What if this is all a mistake? I asked. Derek looked at me like I'd suggested the earth was flat. The numbers matched, Jack. You verified it multiple times. You're a multimillionaire now. Your net worth just went from less than 0 to more than most small countries. I took a deep breath and began sending resignation messages to my 7 different gig apps. Each notification ding felt like a tiny burst of liberation. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. I'm unemployed, I whispered. No, Derek corrected. You're retired. We decided to claim our prize as a trust to maintain some privacy, but in our small city of Providence, Rhode Island, word spread fast. The local news identified us within days, and suddenly people I hadn't spoken to since elementary school were finding my number. My Instagram following went from 267, mostly dog photos from my walking gigs, to over 30,000 in 3 days. My DMs filled with business proposals, date requests, and at least 24 people claiming to be my long-lost relatives. Second cousin on your mother's side. Insisted one message from a profile featuring a man holding a fish. We met at a family reunion in 1998. I was the one who brought the potato salad with raisins. Block, I muttered, swiping away. No one in my family would commit the culinary crime of putting raisins in potato salad. Meanwhile, Mrs. Abernathy was handling her newfound wealth with surprising aplomb. She hired a personal chef, replaced all her furniture with identical but more expensive versions, and started a foundation for ferret rescue. Fernando now had a wardrobe of custom outfits, including a tuxedo, a superhero cape, and what appeared to be a replica of Lady Gaga's meat dress, made of ferret-appropriate proteins. As for me, I was paralyzed by choice. Everyone had opinions about what I should do, but no one seemed to understand my hesitation. I'd gone from fighting for financial survival to having unlimited options, and it felt like being thrown into the deep end without learning to swim first. Just buy something, Derek urged during our weekly lunch, which we now had at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. A house, a car, a private island, something to make it real. I'm still getting used to ordering appetizers, I admitted. Baby steps. But the pressure was building from all sides. My parents, who had spent years gently suggesting more practical career paths, now called daily with investment ideas and charity recommendations. My younger sister, a corporate lawyer who had always been the successful one, suddenly wanted my opinion on everything. Old friends emerged from the woodwork, some with genuine congratulations, others with hands outstretched. The final straw came from an unexpected source. My ex-girlfriend, Amber. Jackie, It's been forever. Her text read, as if she hadn't told me I was financially and emotionally stunted before moving to San Francisco with a blockchain developer named Skylar 18 months ago. I stared at the message for a full minute before showing it to Derek. The audacity, he whistled. Are you going to respond? Not right now, I said, putting my phone away. I need to make some changes first. The next morning, I walked into the luxury car dealership wearing cargo shorts, my oldest t-shirt, and flip-flops. The salespeople gave me the once-over and promptly ignored me. I wandered around for 15 minutes, sitting in various vehicles that cost more than my former annual income, before a young salesman finally approached. Can I help you find something in your price range? He asked with thinly veiled condescension. His name tag read Bradley. I'm interested in that one, I said, pointing to a sleek silver Aston Martin. Bradley's smile tightened. That starts at $189,000. Perhaps something more attainable. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and showed him the balance. His eyes widened to the approximate size of dinner plates. I'll get the manager, he squeaked. 2 hours later, I drove off the lot in my new car, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. I'd never spent that much money at once in my life. It felt both liberating and terrifying. I pulled into Mrs. Abernathy's assigned parking space. She didn't drive anymore, and texted her to come down. She appeared minutes later with Fernando in a sailor outfit. Oh my, she exclaimed, admiring the car. Very James Bond. Want to go for a drive? I offered. I thought we could look at some real estate. She clapped her hands in delight. Let me get Fernando's car seat. I blinked. Fernando has a car seat? Of course, dear. I ordered it custom. It has his name embroidered in Swarovski crystals. 20 minutes later, we were cruising along Ocean Avenue with Mrs. Abernathy in the passenger seat and Fernando secured in a rhinestone-studded contraption that probably cost more than my first car. The absurdity of the situation hit me suddenly, and I burst out laughing. What's so funny? Mrs. Abernathy asked. 6 months ago, I was living on ramen and driving strangers around for tips, I said, wiping tears from my eyes. Now I'm driving an Aston Martin with a bejeweled ferret in the back seat. She patted my arm. Life's funny that way, dear. One day you're just existing, and the next, boom, you're existing with money. Her simple wisdom cut through my anxiety. That's all this was. I was still me, just with different resources. The pressure I felt wasn't coming from the money itself, but from everyone else's expectations of what I should do with it. Mrs. A, you're a genius, I said. I know, dear. Now, about that beachfront property. 2 months after our win, I had settled into a new routine. I bought a modernist house on the water with enough room for a home office, a library, and a guest suite for Mrs. Abernathy when she visited. I hired a financial team that Derek approved of, set up various charitable foundations, and invested in sustainable businesses. I paid off my student loans, the most satisfying wire transfer of my life, and set up college funds for my nieces and nephews. But I was still restless. Everyone I knew was either jealous, sycophantic, or expected me to somehow be different now. Dating was a nightmare. I couldn't tell if people liked me or my bank account. I tried using a fake name and claiming to be a high school teacher, but the lies became exhausting to maintain. You need a project, Mrs. Abernathy declared over Sunday brunch on my patio. Fernando was sunbathing in a custom-made lounger nearby. Something meaningful to focus on. Like what? Should I start rescuing exotic animals too? I nodded toward Fernando, who now had a personal masseuse visit twice weekly. Find something you're passionate about, she suggested. You always loved books. Why not do something with that useless degree of yours? I threw a grape at her, which she deftly dodged. But she had a point. Before economic reality crushed my spirit, I dreamed of opening an independent bookstore, a place for community events, author readings, and discovering new voices. In today's digital marketplace, it had seemed like financial suicide, but now, money was no object. "Mrs. A, you're a genius. Again. Twice in 2 months," she preened. "I'm on a roll." I found a vacant storefront in a trendy area of Providence, near the university, but also accessible to the broader community. The 6,000 square foot space had previously been a clothing store that went out of business during the pandemic. It needed significant renovation, but I could see its potential. I hired an architect with experience designing cultural spaces, and together we created plans for what I was calling the plot twist: a bookstore with a cafe, a performance space, reading nooks, and a section specifically for local authors and small presses. The concept: a place where people could connect over literature regardless of background or budget. Every purchase of a new book would subsidize a free book for someone who couldn't afford it. Local authors could use the space for readings without paying fees. The cafe would employ people transitioning from homelessness or incarceration, providing job training and stable income. It was exactly the kind of passion project I needed, something that leveraged my literature background but also made a concrete difference in the community. For the first time since winning the lottery, I felt purposeful. The construction began in August, and I threw myself into every aspect of the project. I personally selected the books for our opening inventory, focusing on diverse voices and overlooked classics alongside popular bestsellers. I partnered with English departments at local colleges to create internship programs. I scheduled a lineup of events for our first 3 months. Derek was puzzled by my enthusiasm. "You do realize you're essentially creating a high-effort, low-return business, right? This is the opposite of what wealthy people typically do." "That's the point," I told him. "I don't need this to make money. I need it to make sense." As the opening date approached, local media picked up the story. What began as a personal project started gaining attention as an innovative business model. Other wealthy individuals contacted me about replicating the concept in their cities. A prominent author agreed to headline our opening night. 2 weeks before our grand opening, I received an email that made my heart stop. "Hello, Jack. I hope this message finds you well. You may not remember me, but we dated briefly in college before I transferred to UCLA. I've been following your bookstore project in the news, and I'm genuinely impressed by what you're creating. I'm an editor at Beacon Publishing now, and we'd love to feature the plot twist in our Future of Independent Bookselling series. Would you be open to an interview? Warm regards, Elena Martinez." Elena, the one who got away. Before Amber, before my financial struggles, there had been Elena, brilliant, passionate about literature, and completely out of my league. We'd dated for 1 magical semester before her transfer, promising to try long distance, but ultimately drifting apart as our lives moved in different directions. I stared at the email for so long that my screen went dark. Then I called Mrs. Abernathy. "She just wants to interview you for a publishing article," Mrs. Abernathy said pragmatically after I read her the email. "It's not necessarily personal, but what if it is?" I asked, "What if she's only interested now because of the money?" Mrs. Abernathy sighed dramatically. "Jack, dear, not everything is about your bank account. From what you've told me about this woman, she loved books as much as you do. Maybe she's genuinely interested in your project." "Maybe," I admitted, "but how can I ever be sure?" "You can't," she said simply. "That's life, lottery or no lottery. Now stop being paranoid and write her back before I do it for you." With Mrs. Abernathy's threat looming, I crafted a response, professional but warm, agreeing to the interview while giving nothing away about my personal feelings. Elena replied within the hour, suggesting a video call the following week to discuss the feature. For the next 7 days, I alternated between excited anticipation and abject terror. I had my hair cut twice, bought new glasses, and cycled through 15 different shirt options before settling on a simple blue button-down for the call. "You look fine," Mrs. Abernathy assured me, after I FaceTimed her for a final appearance check. "Now remember, this is a professional interview. Don't propose, or anything stupid." I wasn't going to. "Uh-huh," she interrupted skeptically. "Fernando wishes you luck." She held up the ferret, who appeared to be wearing a tiny sweater vest that matched my shirt. I chose not to comment on this. The video call connected precisely on time, and suddenly there she was, Elena, with the same warm smile and intelligent eyes I remembered, though her dark hair was shorter now, cut in a stylish bob that framed her face perfectly. She wore a simple white blouse and minimal jewelry, professional but not flashy. "Jack Reynolds," she said, her voice sending a jolt of recognition through me. "It's been a long time." 10 years, 2 months, I blurted, then winced at my precision. "Approximately." She laughed, that same musical laugh that had captivated me in postmodern fiction class a decade ago. "Still detail-oriented, I see." The interview began professionally enough. She asked thoughtful questions about the plot twist's business model, community initiatives, and literary philosophy. I found myself relaxing as we fell into a familiar rhythm, finishing each other's sentences and referencing obscure authors we'd both admired in college. "This isn't just a rich man's vanity project," she observed near the end of our conversation. "You're creating something with real social value." "That's the goal," I admitted, though some people can't see past the lottery winner headline. A slight frown creased her brow. "Does that bother you? Being defined by the money?" I paused, surprised by the personal turn. "Sometimes. It's changed how everyone sees me, but not how I see myself. Most days, I still feel like the guy who couldn't afford to replace his car's broken air conditioning." "I remember that car," she said with a smile. "We used to call it the mobile sauna." "You remember my car?" "I remember a lot of things, Jack." She hesitated, then added softly, "The article is just part of why I reached out." My heart rate doubled instantly. "Oh, I'm coming to Providence next week for the publishing conference, but also, I thought maybe we could catch up in person." The professional veneer had cracked, revealing something vulnerable in her expression. It wasn't the calculated interest I'd seen from others after my win. It was something genuine, tentative, and hopeful. "I'd like that," I said simply, afraid to say more lest I reveal just how much I'd like that. After we disconnected, I sat staring at my blank screen for several minutes before calling Mrs. Abernathy. She asked me out. I announced without preamble. Or I asked her out. I'm not sure what happened, but we're having dinner when she's in town next week. "Well, of course you are," Mrs. Abernathy said matter-of-factly. "Fernando predicted this, didn't you, Fernando?" I heard chittering in the background that I chose to interpret as ferret matchmaking approval. Elena arrived in Providence the following Thursday. The plot twist was opening in 3 days, and the final preparations had me working 16-hour days, but I'd carved out the entire evening for our dinner. We agreed to meet at a small Italian restaurant in Federal Hill. Nice, but not ostentatious. A place I'd have chosen even before my financial situation changed. I arrived 15 minutes early, too nervous to sit at home any longer. The maitre d' showed me to a quiet corner table, and I ordered a glass of wine to steady my nerves. Just as it arrived, so did Elena. She wore a simple burgundy dress that complemented her olive skin, her hair loose around her shoulders. Heads turned as she crossed the restaurant, not because she was flashy or loud, but because she moved with a confident grace that commanded attention. "You look amazing," I said, standing to greet her. "So do you," she replied, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek that short-circuited my brain momentarily. No more graphic teas with obscure literary puns. "They're still in my closet," I admitted, "but I save them for special occasions now." "Like bookstore openings?" she teased, settling into her chair. "Exactly. I have a Joyce pun picked out that will blow your mind." She laughed, and just like that, the nervousness faded. We ordered appetizers and a bottle of wine, and conversation flowed as if the decade between us had compressed into days. She told me about her publishing career, her brief marriage and divorce to a fellow editor. We were better as colleagues than spouses. Her small apartment in Brooklyn filled with more books than furniture. I shared stories about my post-college struggles, my odd jobs, and finally, tentatively, how the lottery had changed everything and nothing at the same time. I saw all these posts on social media. I confessed, people buying islands and private jets after winning big. But when it happened to me, all I could think was, I can finally get a root canal without putting it on a credit card. She nodded thoughtfully. That seems healthier than immediately buying a gold-plated yacht. "Oh, I did buy one ridiculous thing," I admitted. "An Aston Martin. It felt important to do something irresponsible. Please tell me you drive it wearing a tuxedo and ordering martinis at drive-thrus." "Only on Thursdays," I said solemnly. "It's part of my rich person schedule." We were still laughing when our autres arrived. The conversation shifted to books, authors we'd discovered since college, the changing landscape of publishing. She was passionate about emerging voices, about making literature more accessible. Values aligned perfectly with the plot twist's mission. "I was serious about featuring your store," she said, twirling pasta on her fork. "What you're doing could be a model for saving independent bookstores. If you're looking for a heroic angle, I should confess it's not entirely altruistic," I admitted. "I'm doing it because I love books and missed being around them. The community benefit is a bonus." "The best projects usually start that way," she said. "Passion first, purpose follows." I looked at her across the table, backlit by the restaurant's warm lighting, and felt a sudden certainty that I hadn't experienced since seeing those matching lottery numbers. This connection wasn't about money or status or coincidence. It was about who we had always been to each other. "Elena," I said, setting down my fork, "can I ask you something direct?" She nodded, her expression curious. "Did you contact me because of the lottery win? It's okay if it got your attention. I'm just trying to understand where we stand." She didn't answer immediately, taking a sip of her wine instead. When she set the glass down, her eyes met mine directly. "The money made you visible again, Jack. I won't lie about that. Your story was everywhere for a while, but what made me reach out was seeing what you chose to do with it. The bookstore, the community focus. That's the Jack I remembered." She hesitated, then added, "The Jack I regretted losing touch with." Her honesty was refreshing after months of people pretending my wealth wasn't a factor in their interest. The money had made me visible to her again, but it wasn't why she was sitting across from me now. "I have something to confess too," I said. "I Googled you about once a year since college, just to see how you were doing." Her eyebrows rose. "Seriously, not in a stalker way," I hurried to clarify. "More in a, I wonder if she published that novel she was working on way." "The novel was garbage," she laughed, "but I've been working on something new lately." "I'd love to read it," I said genuinely. Best-selling editor by day, secret novelist by night. Very Clark Kent. More like exhausted editor by day, half-asleep writer by night. But I appreciate the superhero comparison. We lingered over dessert and coffee, neither of us ready for the evening to end. When the restaurant began closing around us, we reluctantly asked for the check. "Let me," she said, reaching for her purse. I raised an eyebrow. The multimillionaire lottery winner would like to treat the successful New York editor to dinner, if that's okay. She hesitated. This is going to be a thing with us, isn't it? The money. Only if we let it be, I said. How about this? Tonight is on me. Next time is on you. We can alternate from there, regardless of relative net worth. Next time, she smiled. That's presumptuous. I prefer optimistic, I countered, signing the bill. Outside the restaurant, the October air was crisp and clear. Elena's hotel was just a few blocks away, and I offered to walk her back. The plot twist opens in 3 days, I said as we strolled along the brick sidewalks of Federal Hill. Would you like to come? VIP access, behind-the-scenes tour, the whole experience. I wouldn't miss it, she said, slipping her hand into mine as naturally as if we'd been doing it for years. My flight isn't until Sunday. When we reached her hotel, she turned to face me. This was nice, Jack. Really nice. It was... I agreed, suddenly feeling like my college self again, nervous, hopeful, standing at the precipice of something important. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed me softly. See you at the grand opening, bookstore mogul. I watched her disappear into the hotel lobby, then walked back to where I'd parked my ridiculous car, feeling lighter than I had in months. Mrs. Abernathy was right. Some things weren't about the money at all. The plot twists opening day arrived with unexpected fanfare. What I'd envisioned as a local event had garnered national attention. A major newspaper ran a feature on our business model. A famous author reshared our social media announcement to his millions of followers. People began lining up hours before our scheduled opening. Inside, I surveyed the space with pride. The renovation had transformed the cavernous storefront into a warm, inviting haven of books. Custom bookcases lined the walls, interspersed with comfortable seating areas. The cafe, staffed with our newly trained team, filled the air with the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods. In the center of the store, a curved staircase led to a mezzanine with rare editions and a small event space. It's magnificent, Mrs. Abernathy declared, appearing at my elbow in a dramatic emerald pantsuit. Fernando, perched on her shoulder, wore matching emerald accessories. You've created something special here. We'll see if anyone actually buys books, I said, anxiously adjusting a display. They will, came Elena's voice from behind me. She'd arrived early, looking professional, yet relaxed in jeans and a blazer. This place feels like magic. Before I could respond, Derek appeared, clipboard in hand. The mayor just arrived for the ribbon cutting. Are you ready? I took a deep breath, looking around at the 3 people who had become my unexpected support system. Mrs. Abernathy with her outrageous outfit and unwavering belief in me, Derek with his financial pragmatism masking genuine friendship, and Elena, a second chance I never expected. Let's do this, I said. The opening ceremony passed in a blur. I cut a ribbon, made a speech about community and literature that thankfully didn't go viral for all the wrong reasons, and then opened the doors to a crowd that flowed in like a literary tidal wave. Every corner of the store filled with people browsing, reading, talking excitedly about discoveries. The day was chaotic, but exhilarating. Our sales exceeded projections within the first 3 hours. The cafe ran out of pastries twice. The local authors section became an impromptu signing event when people recognized writers in the crowd. By closing time, my voice was hoarse from conversations, my cheeks hurt from smiling, and my heart felt fuller than it had in years. After the last customer left, I collapsed onto one of the reading couches beside Elena, who had spent the day helping customers find books despite technically being there as a journalist. That, I exhaled, was incredible. You've created something special, she said, squeezing my hand. This isn't just a store, it's a community. Mrs. Abernathy approached with champagne flutes on a tray. A toast, she declared as Derek, the staff, and various friends who had stayed behind gathered around. To Jack, who took ridiculous good fortune and turned it into something meaningful. To the plot twist, Derek added, raising his glass. To new chapters, Elena said softly, her eyes meeting mine. As we clinked glasses in the bookstore I'd dreamed of since college, surrounded by people I cared about, I realized something important. The lottery hadn't given me purpose. It had simply removed the obstacles to finding it myself. 6 months earlier, I'd been walking an emotional support ferret when random chance changed my financial status forever. But the real transformation hadn't been about the money. It had been about discovering what I valued, what I wanted to create, and who I wanted to share it with. Mrs. Abernathy sidled up to me as the celebration continued. So, are you going to ask that lovely editor to stay in Providence a bit longer? I smiled, watching Elena across the room as she chatted animatedly with our cafe manager. Actually, I've been thinking about spending some time in New York. The plot twist is in good hands with our staff, and I hear Brooklyn has some excellent bookstores to draw inspiration from. Very smooth, Mrs. Abernathy approved. Fernando, and I will water your plants. You just want access to my home theater, I accused. Fernando enjoys surround sound, she said primly, adjusting the ferret's tiny emerald bow tie. He's very cultured. Later that night, as Elena and I walked along the Providence River, the lights of the city reflecting on the water, I felt a sense of peace that all the money in the world couldn't have purchased. What happens next? She asked, her shoulder bumping gently against mine. Well, the bookstore has its grand opening event series. You have an article to write, and I was thinking about looking at some Manhattan real estate. Strictly for business purposes, of course. Of course, she smiled. Any particular neighborhoods? I hear Brooklyn has its charms, I said casually, especially areas within dinner date distance of publishing editors. She laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Jack Reynolds, are you planning to bi-coastal date me? I'm planning to see where this goes, I said honestly. The money gives me freedom to choose what matters, and reconnecting with you definitely matters. She stopped walking and turned to face me. You know what I think. What's that? I think some things were meant to happen, lottery or no lottery. Some people find their way back to each other. As she stepped closer and kissed me under the starlit sky, I had to agree. Some forms of good fortune had nothing to do with random numbers and everything to do with second chances. And even a ferret-walking former rideshare driver with a useless degree could get lucky twice. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible content.